Welcome to the Utah Interfaith Forum, where you see interfaith in action. I am your host, Stephen Peinecker. Of course, you know me as the host of Mormon Book Reviews, and we are going to be simultaneously releasing this episode on both MBR and on the Utah Interfaith Forum channel, which we want to encourage people to go to. Look up Utah Interfaith Forum on YouTube and make sure you're subscribed to that. It's really important we get more subscribers there, get us to 1,000 subscribers ASAP. And honestly, this is a very exciting opportunity. Now, many of you know that I started off this because I was handed control of the Utah Interfaith Forum Facebook group. And for me, of course, being a YouTuber, I'm like, well, it just seems only natural that if we have this 1,000-member group that's very active and actually having dynamic conversations, and I'm going to have a link in the description to our Facebook page, so check that out. I thought the natural extension of that should be a YouTube channel. So this is kind of like now I would call it the official launch of the Utah Interfaith Forum. And I'm very excited to introduce to you my co-host, Monica Bombrow. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Did
Glad
I,
to be here.
did I pronounce that right?
It's going to take you time. It took me a long time to get it right. That's okay.
So how do we pronounce it?
Bam, bro.
Bambro. See, okay, I just got to remember Bam. Okay.
Yes,
Like
that's how I
Emeril
tell
Lagasse.
everybody. But
That's
I
right.
like Bam, bro, because that's like a Floridian accent or a Midwest accent.
That's true. That's certainly true. There's a lot of Midwest here as well.
Yeah.
So, Monica, I'm just very excited to have you on the program, and I actually want you to kind of just talk a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself to the audience. Now, of course, you've been a guest on Mormon Book Reviews because, of course, you gave me the temple tour of the Orem Temple, which was really awesome and had a wonderful time. But before we get started with our guests, I just want you to tell a little bit about yourself, about how you ended up into this interfaith space.
I ended up in this interfaith space just by living in Mesa, Arizona, I think. It wasn't anything that was forced. That was just my life. That was my neighbors. That was my classmates, work environment. I had friends of every faith. And so that just helped me along my life and my experiences. And I've had many callings within the church, which just happened to bring me to this point. I don't think they called me because they knew all of my background. It just happened to work out that that is my background. So now I have an opportunity to help further the cause of interfaith connections because I believe that's so important for communities. And I'm not here as a spokesman for the church, but I'm here to help continue to build bridges between all faiths, all community members, nonprofits, any service that's happening in the community, that's where I'm at. And so this is just a natural thing for us to do together.
Yeah, excellent. I'm so excited to be partnering up with you, Monica. This is exciting. And speaking of somebody who actually was, because he was born in where he was born, kind of had an interfaith experience with him as well. I want to welcome to the program David Dollahite. I just should have asked you ahead of time. How do we pronounce that?
Dollahite.
Dollahite, David Dollahite, who is with a group called American Families of Faith, and we're going to talk about that. But man, you've had a very interesting story. You found yourself into an interfaith space like very few people I've ever seen. I mean, you've got Orthodox symbology behind you. You've got Muslim stuff, Jewish stuff. You are really involved in the interfaith world. And I want to talk about that, but I want you to give us a little bit of your background because you are actually a convert to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but you actually were born and raised Episcopalian. So I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about your background, which certainly informs this interfaith conversation.
Sure. Thank you. Well, it's delightful to be with each of you. Thank you for doing this. I'm thrilled that you're doing these conversations, and I wish you every blessing of success in all that you do. Yeah, I was raised in Northern California in the Bay Area. My mom was raised by an Irish Catholic mom and a Norwegian Lutheran dad. My dad was raised in the Baptist faith, and then my dad became Episcopalian when his father was killed by a drunk driver, and a local Episcopal priest, Father Todd Ewald, came over with his wife to take care of my father and his siblings. My dad was 14 when his dad was killed. And so then he and his siblings joined the Episcopal Church, and my parents got married in the Episcopal Church, and I was born and therefore baptized in the Episcopal faith. And my interfaith journey really began at my Episcopal baptism when I was 19 days old, where my godfather was my Uncle Gene, who at that time was a deacon in the Episcopal Church and later became a priest, spent his life as an Episcopal priest. My godmother was my mom's best friend, Ann Sinsky, who is Jewish. And how that came about was when Father Ewald asked my mom who would be my godfather, she said, oh, his uncle, Gene. And Father Ewald said, that's great. He's a deacon in my church. Perfect. And who will be his godmother? Ann Sinsky, my best friend. Well, tell me about Ann. Well, she's Jewish. Sorry, Elizabeth, said Father Ewald, you can't have a Jewish godmother for an Episcopal baptism. A godparent has to be a baptized member. And my mom, being the strong person she was, said, well, in that case, he won't be baptized. And Father Ewald said, well, I guess we can make an exception in this case. So there's a picture of me being held by Father Ewald with my Jewish godmother and my Episcopal priest godfather there. And so I grew up with my family. For example, my sister, older sister, was from my mom's first marriage. She was Catholic. She went to Catholic school. So I grew up in an Episcopal home, but my sister went to Catholic school. Most of my friends were Catholic, spent lots of time with wonderful coaches in sports that were very devout Catholics and very, very devout in the religion of baseball as well. And then I was an altar boy in the Episcopal Church from age 9 to 12. I served as an acolyte or an altar boy. And I was raised in a high church Episcopal faith with the incense and the chanting and, very highly liturgical faith. My father was a lay reader in the Episcopal Church. My mom was the president of the Altar Guild. So I was very involved in the Episcopal Church. And then when I was about 12, stopped going to the Episcopal Church because the American religion of baseball was happening on Sundays, Little League Baseball. And so I became a Little League Baseball player, and that's why I had all these great Catholic coaches. So I wasn't religious in a traditional sense during my teen years. And then when I was 18, I became introduced to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is itself a whole story. And I've written quite a bit about that. And, so I'm happy to talk in as much detail as you want about that, but happy to take your lead as terms of what you'd like me to talk
So
about.
I think you should. I think what we want to do is briefly talk about that and how it as it informs the interfaith conversation that we're having. And honestly, I'm thinking, Monica, I said maybe we need to have him also come on to tell about his conversion story on Mormon Book Reviews as well. That might be a future thing, but maybe just briefly talk about that because I think it's important that we do have that insight.
Okay. So my mom worked with a woman who was LDS. She worked at a doctor's office, and my mom would talk about what she was learning about this Mormon religion from her friend LaDonna, about their missionary program and their food storage program and their, temples. And I was not at all interested. I was, very involved in sports. I was a freshman in college, going to a local junior college. I had literally no interest in God, no interest in religion. So my parents seemed to me to be somewhat interested in this religion, and they actually went to a temple pageant at the Oakland Temple. They went to some picnic that the church held, and so I thought that my parents were going to join this weird Mormon religion. And I told them, I want nothing to do with this. Keep me out of this. And they said, oh, we're not going to join. We're just interested. We're just being nice, polite neighbors. Friends of Mrs. Leininger. And so I honestly thought that they were going to join this religion. One day I came home and there was this blue book sitting on the table, the Book of Mormon, with the Angel Moroni on it. Yep, exactly like that book that you got with the Angel Moroni on it. And I saw that book and I thought, oh no, my parents are going to read the weird Mormon Bible and they're going to become Mormons. So I told them, keep this away from me. I don't want anything to do with this. And they said, okay. So the book got put on the bookshelf. A couple months later, I was sitting at home watching television, and I had this, for me, a very strange thought. I should read a book. I thought, okay, I'm in college now, and maybe I should actually read a book on my own. I was not a reader. I was a dumb jock. So I went over to the bookshelf. My mom was an avid reader. She had lots of books. And I looked at all these books, and my eye caught this little blue paperback book in the upper left-hand corner of the bookshelf. And I felt this strong feeling I should read that book. Pulled it off the shelf and I began reading. And I immediately began feeling these strange feelings. I thought it was like shivers up and down my spine. I didn't know what it was. I thought there must be a draft in the room. It was November in California, so it was freezing. It must have been all the way down to 50 degrees or something. And I went over and checked all the windows, and it wasn't a draft. So, okay, so I kept reading. I read about 20 pages. I had to go to work. I drove to my job at a movie theater, and I was sitting behind the counter once the movie started, and I was thinking, maybe there's a God. Maybe I should read this religious book. I mean, it kind of makes me feel these unusual feelings. And right as I was having that thought, this guy walked out of the theater, an old man, walked up to me and pulled a pack of cigarettes out of his pocket. And he said, "These cigarettes are cool cigarettes." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I used to smoke Camel cigarettes, but God came to me and told me that I must stop smoking cool and start smoking." And then he began to tell me a bunch of, strange things that God had told me. And I thought, religion makes you crazy. Forget it. I'm not going to read that book. Religion just makes nuts.
Okay.
And I remembered one of my very good friends, tennis buddy. We traveled around California playing tennis together. He called me one day at the movie theater, just a few weeks before then, told me he'd been mugged in New York, left for dead, beaten up, and a Christian pastor found him and brought him home and nursed him back to health, kind of a good Samaritan kind of a thing, and took good care of him and preached Jesus to him. And my friend Rob called me, told me about this, and told me that I was a sinner and I was going to hell. And if I didn't accept Jesus, I was going to go to hell. And he was right. I was a sinner. And I said, "Thank you, Rob. I'm glad you're okay. I'm glad you're happy in your new faith, but no, thank you. No, Dave, really, you're going to hell unless you accept Jesus." Well, that may be true, but thank you. I'm not interested. Anyway, so that thought of, okay, religion makes you a little crazy, so I'm not interested. Long story short, I get home, strong feelings. I should read the book. I began reading, feeling those same feelings. I had many times during that night that I read the entire night. Many times that I thought, what am I doing? This is crazy. I'm sitting up all night reading a book. See, religion makes you crazy. And I wanted to put it down, but kept feeling I couldn't have told you what it was. I knew it was somehow God telling me that I should keep reading. So I did. And I read the whole book in 2 nights. And then at the end, read some verses that said you should pray and ask. I prayed. And in the Episcopal Church, you knelt and prayed. So I knelt near my bed and prayed. And I had a overpowering born again experience, a mighty change of heart experience. I knew that God lived. I knew that I was a sinner, and the Book of Mormon made that very clear that sinners need to accept Jesus. And so I accepted Jesus, and I asked for forgiveness of my sins. And I had one of those experiences that it's very difficult to explain in words, but I felt like a completely new person. I felt the power of God cleanse me of my sins. I felt like a new person. And I knew that Jesus was the Christ. I knew that I had been forgiven. And I knew the Book of Mormon was the Word of God. And so that morning, I told my mom that I had read the book. I mean, it was about 5:30 in the morning, about 6 in the morning. I could hear my mom downstairs. I went downstairs. I said, "Mom, I've read the Book of Mormon that Mrs. Leininger gave you, and I have a bunch of questions. Could you ask her to call me?" And so later that night, I get a phone call. It's Mrs. Leininger. And she said, "I hear you read the Book of Mormon and you have some questions." I said, I did, and I do have a lot of questions. So I asked her all my questions, and she sat and talked to me. This was an old lady. She was probably the age I am now, probably in her 60s. This is some old lady calling me that I barely knew. I mean, I'd seen her a few times when I went to pick up my mom at work, but I didn't know her at all. And she spent 3 hours talking with me and answering my questions. And she kept trying to get me to come to church the next day. She said, "There's a special church meeting. We want you to come." And I said, "Well, I feel like I need to read the Book of Mormon a few more times before I come." She says, No, you'll be just fine. You just ought to come." Anyway, she talked me into coming to this meeting. And she told me, she said, "It's a special meeting. It's a fast and testimony meeting." And I thought, okay, if it's a fast meeting, that'd be good, because I remember church kind of being long and slow. And thought, okay, if this is a fast meeting, sure.
Sure.
3 hours later.
3 hours later. And actually, it was a youth conference, special meeting on a Saturday morning, and they had a special speaker from Salt Lake City that came out, and then there was a testimony meeting. So, and because it was a youth conference, there's a bunch of high school kids that were there, and I was just out of high school. And so hearing all these young kids, my age, And I hadn't met any Mormons before. Well, I didn't think I had. It turns out I knew a couple, but they weren't active in the church when I met them. Anyway, so hearing all these young kids talking about their beliefs was really powerful. It was like, wow, I mean, these are people my own age. And I got to tell you, when they first brought me into the church, I was expecting like what I grew up with, crucifix and candles and incense and choir and priest in robes. And I was expecting all that. And they just brought me into this gym that they call the cultural hall, and they had the speakers up on the stage. And I'm thinking, this is an interesting church. I mean, it's not like the church I'm used to. I didn't see any stained glass windows. And so it was kind of strange. But I felt those same feelings that I had felt while reading the Book of Mormon. I felt there in the church meeting. And after the meeting, we all stood up, and Mrs. Leininger turned to me and said, "So what did you think, Dave?" And I said, "It was incredible. How do I join your church?" And she said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Okay." So she, calls over the missionaries. So I see these two guys in suits and ties with short haircuts, and this was the 70s in California, so we all had long hair, with their name tags on, and they came over and they were super enthusiastic, super excited to talk to me. And so I got my first missionary lesson, and in that lesson, as they're teaching, I felt the same feelings that I had felt reading the Book of Mormon, that I had felt in the church meeting. And I'm thinking to myself, what are these feelings? Like, what is this? And one of the missionaries stops mid-sentence and says, "Dave, what you're feeling right now is the Holy Ghost telling you that these things are true." And I was stunned that this guy knew that I was feeling something. And he said, "That's what you felt while you read the Book of Mormon. That's what you felt this morning in the meeting." I was blown away that this guy that I had just met, who was about my same age, he was an Idaho farm boy, that he somehow read my mind and knew that I was feeling some things. So let's just say it progressed very quickly from then. I accepted the invitation to be baptized in 2 weeks, and I committed to that. So that's the very short
Very good.
version of my conversion. So
That's remarkable, and and I think that, in the space that I grew up in the born again, charismatic Pentecostal tradition. So a lot of what you're saying would resonate with people from that part of evangelicalism. Some would not, but there are many that would. And I tell you, you're not the first person that I've talked to and had on my program that said that they became a born again Christian by reading the Book of Mormon. And I think that's really important for for those of you who are on the outside listening to this conversation, I think it's really important you hear these kinds of stories because, again, I'm coming from the evangelical world and we're trying to have a conversation. And honestly, that story adds to that conversation another data point for people to consider when they're looking at the truth claims and validity of Mormonism vis-a-vis their evangelical worldview. So thank you very much for sharing that story. I do have one more question, though, that's even more pressing. Okay.
sure, great.
So were you a San Francisco Giants fan or an Oakland A's fan? Or Northern California?
In those days, the Oakland A's won 3 World Series in a row.
Yep.
Vita Blue and
Vita
Tito
Blue.
Fuentes, and so my friends and I were more likely to reenact the Oakland A's as opposed to the Giants. But I was also a Oakland Raiders fan. They were a better team than the 49ers in those days. But I grew up, cheering for both the 49ers and the Raiders and both the Giants and the A's.
That's great. Good to know. We just recently had Burgess Owens on, who played for
Oh,
the
yeah.
LA Raiders or
Yeah.
Oakland Raiders at the time, a congressman, and so that's really cool. So good to know we have that connection. I'm a Cubs fan all the way. I'm a North Sider,
Cubs.
so so that's great. I love it. I love the religion of baseball. That's very apt there. So
Yeah, it was in those days in the town I grew up in. It was absolutely a religion.
That's right. That's right. Yep. And so maybe that's another interfaith conversation we can have down the road as
Yeah.
well. So, David, I think it's really fascinating. And Monica, actually, I'd like for you to maybe jump in here and say, was there anything about the story he just told that you might want to follow up or ask him about?
I just love the fact that you were open, even though you thought you were closed, right? Your spirit had a different thing in mind for you, and that you were prompted to do something and you followed it. And I think that that's important in any religion. Are we open to feel? Are we open to explore? Are we open to understand? And I think that every conversion story has piece of that in it to make all of this possible. And I love that you had many faiths around you.
Mhm.
So you had seen a lot and understood a lot. And so I would wonder, what is the one thing that stood out to you that made you say, this is the one for me? I'm choosing this one. I'm going this direction.
Yeah, it's a great question. I really wasn't open. God had to sort of pry me open with the powerful spiritual feelings. I mean, God was quite insistent, because literally dozens of times, both the 2 nights I stayed up all night reading, I wanted to stop and put it down and get to sleep and stop doing this weird thing of staying up all night reading this weird book. And so I was only open to the extent that when repeated powerful promptings urged me to keep reading, I was willing to do that. And so, yes, I'm, and in terms of interfaith conversations, we have to be willing to be open to promptings, directions, guidance from the Spirit and from the persons that we're talking with. We have to be willing to learn from them and open ourselves up to new ways of thinking. And I'm incredibly grateful that the Lord was patient with me and my stubborn pride. And in that prayer, I felt things. I felt the love of God that I'd never felt before. I felt loved at a depth and with a power that I had never experienced. And so I'm one of those persons who's extremely fortunate to be able to say that I was snatched, grabbed out of a path. And when I look at my friends and associates at that time, many of whom became addicted to substances, many of whom struggled in mighty ways with their lives. Divorce and suicide and addiction was quite common. As I've gone back for reunions and so forth, I've seen that faith, strong faith of whatever that faith was. For most of my friends, it was Catholic. Strong faith is incredibly powerful and is a great blessing in lives. Had I not had that kind of a born again experience, I'm not sure that I would have made those kind of changes. And I made a lot of very clear overnight changes in terms of the word of wisdom and tithing and all kinds of things. So
Fascinating. That's just a wonderful story. And thank you for sharing that. Oh, Monica.
Yeah, there's a quote that came to my mind that I absolutely love. And it's, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. So I think if we understand that we are these spiritual beings, that we'll be open to learn more. We're more connected than maybe we ever thought we were. And that was by, who was that?
Catholic theologian.
J.R.R. Tolkien, right?
No, it's Catholic theologian. I'm not remembering his name right now, but yeah, it's a powerful sentiment that I like to think of it, we are eternal beings having
Yeah.
a mortal experience, not
Right.
just mortal experiences, having occasional eternal experiences. So
Right. And I'm guessing that J.R.R. Tolkien maybe just quoted that.
lots of people quote that.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
a great thought. Yeah.
And I love that, because then it just ties us. It ties us to heaven, even when we think maybe we're not.
I love that. I love it. So David, you gave us some great background here. And I guess I'd like for you just to tell us about how you ended up doing the project that you're doing, the interfaith work that you're doing. Maybe just talk about maybe some things that happened in your life that informed it, and then just tell us about the project you're involved in.
Happy to. Thank you. Great question. So, well, I served an LDS mission that was a wonderfully interfaith experience. Many people would understandably think that LDS missions are like the farthest thing from an interfaith experience you could have, because you're out trying to convert people. But actually, most LDS missionaries end up having more conversations with people of faith and of other faiths at that time in their life than any other time. And certainly in my case, I served in New England, in mostly in Boston, and had literally thousands of conversations with wonderful people from many faith backgrounds. And that sort of opened up my eyes to all the strengths that come from living a life of faith. And I, LDS missionaries get to spend thousands of hours in the homes of hundreds of people. And you get to see the challenges that they face and the ways that their own faith. I mean, most people who interact with LDS missionaries obviously have no interest in converting. So the vast majority of contacts and conversations we have are with people who are either happy in their faith and they'd like to convert us to their faith, or they're not particularly involved in a faith and they're interested in learning, but they have some kind of a faith upbringing. And so I had wonderful relationships with priests and ministers of many faiths. Speaking of the religion of baseball, one Catholic priest we got to know gave us tickets to go to a Red Sox game, Red Sox against the White Sox in an intersectional game at Fenway Park, the cathedral of baseball, or at least one of the cathedrals of baseball. And so, we went with this Catholic priest and watched this game, and I had many wonderful interactions with people of faith. Then the research that I do on family life, it's lots of social science research has found in literally thousands of studies that more religious people tend to do better in their psychology, in their mental health, in their physical health, in their relationships, in their marriage, and their parenting. And so you can't be a social scientist and read, lots of research on social science and not realize, oh, religion is a very powerful force for good. And so many of these studies are done by people that are not themselves religious. They're secular social scientists, and they're using sophisticated statistical methods to do analyses of the data. But the data just keep coming up again and again and again that religiosity or religiousness tends to be correlated with all kinds of benefits in individual lives and in families and in marriages. And so Dr. Lauren Marks and I, my longtime friend and colleague, thought that we'd like to interview highly religious folks and ask them about what it is about their faith, their beliefs, their practices, their communities that they think helps them. Because most of these studies were done with statistical analyses using quantitative measures where, they would, on a some type of a scale like 1 to 7, they'd say, yes, I'm quite religious, and yes, I'm happy in my marriage, and yes, I have good optimism or whatever. And so there's statistical connections, but that research doesn't really tell us much about why the processes are going on. So Lauren and I decided to start interviewing folks that were highly involved in their faith and find out why this relationship exists. So we began by interviewing religious leaders, priests, rabbis, imams, pastors, bishops of many faiths. I've interviewed more than 30 pastors and leaders of various faiths, talked to them, and then asked if we could interview some people in their congregation. They would give us referrals. We'd go and do that. And this research began right around, I had planned to do this research in 2001. And then in, of course, September of 2001, 9/11 hit. And I was in Boston, in Amherst, just outside of Boston, doing my research in the January of 2002 through June of 2002. So literally just a couple of months after 9/11, I began doing these interviews. And it was, fascinating because all of a sudden the whole country was interested in learning more about Islam, learning more about other faiths. We got to interview imams and Muslim families at the mosque. It was a marvelous experience of learning about what people who believe in God, how they incorporate their faith into their home life, into their marriage and families. So now, 25 years later, we've interviewed about 300 families across the country from all the major Abrahamic faiths. I think I mentioned this to you when we were chatting beforehand, about 20 denominations of Christians, the 3 major branches of Judaism, 2 major branches of Islam. And we've done in-depth interviews, usually 2 to 3 hour interviews with these families. We've attended their services and found out, how it is that their faith informs their family life. And we've since done a number of articles for general, about 200 articles for social science journals, and then about, I think, 3 dozen now articles for newspapers and magazine and online sources. We've now done a podcast on this, the American Families of Faith podcast, which you can get on all kinds of platforms. We've got a number of videos that highlight families of other faiths. So our whole project is trying to understand how faith influences family life, how religion benefits family relationships.
Wow, that's fantastic. And I actually, folks, I am posting up here the website. Do you guys see it by chance? I'm just making sure.
Yep, I can see
Okay,
it.
so this is the website of the American Families of Faith Project, and it's really an amazing thing. And this is actually something that's part of Brigham Young University. So maybe just talk about um, how did you go? Like, did you go to BYU and make a proposal about this project, and did they catch the vision right away, or did they encourage you to do it? Just to maybe talk about the origin in that regard as well, vis-a-vis your relationship with BYU.
Yeah. So I did my master's in family therapy and a bachelor's in family life at BYU back in the 80s. And then I did a doctorate at University of Minnesota in the late 80s. And then I taught for a few years at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. And then I came to BYU and joined the faculty in 1993. So I've been here a little over 30 years. And my first project here was studying fathering. And we interviewed about 35 fathers. And Dr. Lauren Marks, who's now also a professor here at BYU, was an undergraduate student way back then. And he did these interviews, and I interviewed a number of LDS fathers as well. And we weren't intending to do a study on religion. We were wanting to learn about how fathers of kids with special needs coped, and how they sort of dealt with this challenge of having a child born with a very significant disability or significant illness. And so we interviewed these 35 dads, and we didn't ask them any questions about religion, but not surprisingly, they talked a lot about how their faith, their beliefs, the Holy Ghost, the priesthood, church, the structure of the church that kind of, gave them social support. They talked a lot about religion. And so when we first presented our findings to a group of BYU faculty members, my colleagues in the School of Family Life, one of our colleagues, who is a great friend and a great scholar, said to us, guys, this is interesting research. It's really too bad that it will never be published. And that was a perfectly legitimate statement in the early 90s to say the chances of getting research about LDS dads talking about their kids with special needs and how their religion strengthens them, you're probably going to have a hard time getting that published in secular social science journals. That was a very, very legitimate prediction. We're very grateful that it turned out, for a number of reasons. The field was opening up to religion at that time. Up until then, it was accurate to say that religion was the anti-tenure topic, that you couldn't really be a functioning researcher in the social sciences and do religion, because there was kind of this separation and kind of a hostility and skepticism toward each other. But we were fortunate enough that the fathers who we interviewed were so articulate in talking about their experience. I mean, for example, one father talked about when his child was born prematurely and was in the incubator in an intensive care unit of the hospital. And he asked the doctors and nurses if he could give this child a priesthood blessing. And they said yes. And so he put his hands into the incubator through those glove things, and he laid his hands on his little tiny premature infant baby's head and gave a priesthood blessing, which is an LDS practice that is a meaningful and spiritual experience that brings comfort and healing. Anyway, he told this experience, and of course he got quite emotional, and he said, I felt the love of God for my child. I felt the love of God flow through me to my child. I felt healing power, and I knew that God was going to bless my child. And that was several years before, and the Lord had in fact blessed that child, and the child had healed. And anyway, so these kinds of experiences, even a person without religious faith, if they're at all, open to human experience, are going to resonate with that sort of thing. And so that kind of began, and we began publishing the next several years, probably 5 years. We published a number of articles in the social sciences, and we're surprised that the field was open to that. And then we decided, let's move beyond our own faith community. Let's go and interview other families of faith and find out how our Jewish friends, our Catholic friends, our Baptist friends, our Muslim friends how they incorporate faith into their life. And so we began those interviews in 2000, 2001, or in my case, 2002. Dr. Marsh began in 2001, right about the same time that 9/11 hit. So that was kind of the early origins. And yeah, BYU has been very supportive. They've given us, financial support over the years. As you'd expect, it's not easy to raise money in from the federal government or from, secular foundations for this kind of research. So we've been very fortunate that BYU has supported it over the years with generous funding and totally supportive of the work that we're doing.
Wow, that is really fantastic. And I know, Monica, please feel free to step in here. But before I do that, I just wanted to ask you, so you decided to broaden out this topic to include people of different religious faiths within America. What do you find? Do you find that different religions have different experiences, or do you find that they're pretty universal in their application? Maybe talk about that.
Yeah, great question. I was delighted to have the experience of interviewing, in addition to those 32 pastors and rabbis and priests and imams, I got to interview close to 60 families of various faiths, along with 80 of their adolescent kids. So about 240, 250 highly religious people got to sit in their homes, in their living rooms, around their kitchen tables, and talk about the things that they consider to be most important in their life, their faith and their family, and how faith and family kind of intersected. It was just a delightful experience. And almost every interview, I found myself thinking, there is so much more in common that people of high faith have, that it's easy for us as human beings to focus on our differences. And it's a natural thing that human beings kind of want to group people into differences. And it's us and them, and we kind of want to look down on people that are different. My experience was the core processes were the same: turning to God in prayer, feeling God's love and support and guidance and healing and help in their family life, turning to sacred text, whether that was the Quran, the Torah, the Bible, the Book of Mormon, but turning to sacred text, God's word, and trying to receive some guidance, some assistance, some healing, some forgiveness, and going to religious services, whether that's at a synagogue, a mosque, a temple, a church, a chapel, whatever. Going to services with a faith community, feeling sort of part of something bigger than yourself, getting support from leaders and members of your faith, hearing sermons, singing together, praying together. So even though the names and the very specifics might have been different, those core processes were very similar. And I remember myself feeling so many times, if I lived in this area, I was on sabbatical. I was obviously far away from my home in New England for 6 months, and then in California for another summer doing interviews. So many times I found myself thinking, if our family happened to live in this area, I would love for our family to be dear friends of this Jewish family, this Muslim family, this Catholic family, this evangelical family. I'd love for my kids to know these kids. And what I learned was, because I interviewed a little over 80 youth, and hearing them talk about their faith and hearing the sacrifices that they made for God, for Jesus, for Allah, the different lives that they were living. They were usually, people of strong faith are often kind of different from their peers who are not religious, and their peers who are not religious are often trying to get them, come to these parties and, here drink this and here smoke that and here watch this. And these kids had a similar experience where they were trying to live their faith in a context that was often trying to sort of pull them away from faith. And so these kids were, I was so impressed with these youth, and again, across faiths, that they were devoted and willing to be different, willing to be, laughed at by their peers, willing to live their faith despite social and peer opposition. It was marvelous. And so I think the metaphor that I like to use is an Olympic village. If you go into an Olympic village, you'll find athletes that are world-class athletes at whatever their sport is. And if you compare, basketball or skiing or gymnastics or or whatever the sport is, those sports are all different. And like the skills, the specific skills that you're involved in are a little different. But in terms of being a world-class athlete, you got to be super devoted, you got to be in good health, you got to be mentally strong, you got to be committed, making sacrifices for your sport. So my guess is that people in Olympic villages, they probably connect, like whatever their sport is, they probably connect at a very deep level because they're living a life devoted to that sport. That's what I found with interacting with people from so many faiths, is that, yeah, sure, there were differences, different names and approaches and ways of doing things, but the underlying devotion, the underlying commitment, the underlying willingness to sacrifice, the underlying sort of willingness to serve others outside of your comfort zone, the willingness to think about, pray about, ponder about what God would want you to do, and then trying to do that, that was universal.
Beautiful.
When you're talking about being with all these faiths, it reminded me of a series I just watched, which was a Turkish series. So it focused heavily on Muslim tradition, Jewish tradition. And I was so grateful to see their dedication. And like you said, I'd love them to come and be my neighbor. It's not something that I understand because it's different, but it was beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think that missing on those touches of other cultures and other beliefs hinders our progress. I think it's a benefit for us to absolutely understand other people and what they believe and accept it as a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And so I would say from listening to you that you have gratitude that they were blessing their communities as well. It's not just their family, it's a blessing to everyone around them, which is why faith is so important and religions are so important, whatever they are.
Absolutely. Yeah. Amen.
So, one thing I did want to ask you was of course, you are engaging these people from different faith traditions, and you are probably learning a lot about them, of course, but I want the perspective of you being a Latter-day Saint. What kind of things did they learn from you? Like, were there sometimes people might be a little hostile or put up barriers, or were they curious? Maybe talk about as a Latter-day Saint engaging these other faith traditions.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we sent a letter to religious leaders in the community explaining the research we were doing and promising them, explaining my background, that I'm a BYU professor, active Latter-day Saint. I served a mission for my church. So I understand that you might be quite hesitant to let me into the homes of your parishioners for fear that I might proselyte. So we would literally in the letters, I promise you, I will not proselyte, nor will I answer questions about my faith if asked. And when I talked to the religious leaders, yes, a number of them were concerned about opening the doors of their congregants to some BYU maybe person proselyting under cover of dark or something. And so I looked them in the eye and I promised them that. So here's how it went. Usually at first there was a little bit of skepticism and sort of like, who is this person coming into our home? He's a professor, he's a social scientist, and he's a Mormon. So what's this going to be like? But after a while, as I would listen and enthusiastically nod and ask for more and not say anything about my faith, asking about their faith and being, I think some were more concerned about the social scientist thing, like is he going to be skeptical of God? Is he going to be all science and facts, and he's gonna kind of look at us as weird if we talk about our faith? And so the fact that I was open and enthusiastically supportive of their faith, their approach, their experiences, their background, and not trying to put anything of me into it, I just felt the softening occurred. People became more open, and they became quite enthusiastic about sharing their faith. Many of them described how they'd never had a conversation like this with someone that was not trying to sort of come back with their religion, and they were quite surprised that a Latter-day Saint was willing to and happy to spend literally a couple of hours listening to them and not put myself. A few times folks would say at the end, So, you've been very, open and wanting to hear about our faith. We'd like to learn about your faith. Could you tell us about your faith? And I would say, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I promised your pastor that I would not do that. So I can't do that. There are Latter-day Saints in this area. If you're interested, you can go find out from them, but I can't do that. And they were a little surprised. I mean, like they gave me the invitation. You can talk to us about your religion, and I wouldn't do it. And that actually was a meaningful thing for me. I'm thinking of a Jewish rabbi, Rabbi Perlman, at the Hillel Center on University of Massachusetts at Amherst campus. He'd heard about the research I was doing because I had attended a number of Reform and Orthodox synagogues. So he heard that there was this, BYU professor here doing research and interviewing Jewish families as well as, families of other faiths. He invited me to come talk to his Jewish students at the Hillel Center. So I came in the evening and he said, you can talk about whatever you'd like, talk about your research. And I spent the whole hour talking about Judaism, how much I loved the faith, how powerful the faith was for strengthening marriage and family life, how much I appreciated the Jewish folks and appreciated, and I described the research that other people had done as well as what we had done. And I basically preached to these Jewish kids, be all in on your faith, be all in on Shabbat, be all in on doing your traditions. And afterwards, Rabbi Perlman came up to me and said, I really can't believe what I just witnessed. An active, devoted Mormon preaching to a group of Jews to be the best Jews they can. Wow, thank you. I didn't expect that. But, I, as a rabbi, when I tell these kids that Judaism is great and they should, do our tradition, yeah, you're a rabbi. Of course, you're saying that. He said, thank you for coming and giving, an outside perspective. And so anyway, those are the sorts of experiences that I love to have. And I've talked with many people of many faiths, and I'm happy to share with them the benefits to their personal life, their mental health, their physical well-being, their relationships, to be all in on their faith. And obviously, we've also learned that some ways of being religious can be harmful. When people are very dogmatic, extremist, and don't honor other people's choices and agency, and sadly, if mental health issues are combined with religion, it can get pretty dysfunctional pretty quick. And so we've done studies about how religion, when lived in certain ways, can actually be harmful to faith. And I've learned in talking with my social science colleagues, most of whom are not religious, that what they, on the one hand, when we first will share our research, they'll say, yeah, you're talking about how religion helps people. But what about the Crusades? What about 9/11? What about, the ways that religion can harm? So we've learned that we need to acknowledge upfront that yes, religion can be harmful. And so we're not saying that religion is always good in every situation. We're not saying that the way that everyone lives their faith is healthy. But we are saying that for most people, because this is empirical research, for most people, religion is very helpful to them in most ways. But we also do talk about sort of healthy ways of being religious, or how to be religious in ways that are compassionate and kind and patient and gentle and honoring of other people within your home and family, as well as in your faith community, as well as across community.
Yeah, great. Monica?
So I just recently gave a tour of Temple Square, the portion that's opened, and Conference Center and Family History Center to two Jewish gentlemen that came in from New Jersey and from Manhattan. And I'm not there to proselytize either. That's not my place. I'm not here to convert anybody. But after the tour, I said, tell me about you. I want to know about you. So I love that they asked that, because I think that that's key in the exchange of interfaith interactions. I'm not just here to talk about myself. I truly want to know about you. What do you believe? How does this fit into your life? Because they were so gracious in learning about different things that we came across. And they really wanted to go to the History Center, the Mormon History Center, Museum, sorry. And they already knew, oh, this is Moroni, this is Joseph Smith, and oh, didn't that prophet work for the government? And, they had a little bit of background. So for me, that's a gift to share my beliefs. And in return, I wanted to receive a gift from them. I think that is a gift when we share,
It is. Yeah, well
right? And I think they were kind of like surprised that I asked, well, tell me about you. I want to know about your beliefs because I know minimal pieces. And I'm not going to go to the internet to learn this. I want to learn it from you. I think it's truer, it's more touching, it's the real experience. And so if we can all participate in sharing our gifts of beliefs without judgment, we can have these beautiful things that you're experiencing.
Yeah, David, talk about the importance of having face-to-face encounters like that and having those interactions. I think that's really vital to this whole process.
It absolutely is. Yeah, we have a model that we've developed that we call the climbing over the empathy wall. The empathy wall is that wall between two people who don't know each other and don't therefore have empathy. So there's this kind of wall between them. And we've developed a set of ideas, kind of a ladder to go up and over the empathy wall and get you down to where someone else is to learn about those. And yeah, you can watch videos and read books and you know, sort of, we call that indirect learning, and that's great, and that can help you learn to appreciate and kind of understand. But we say that those personal relationships are the most important. So going to someone else's worship service, which is not easy for people. I'm an extrovert, so it's pretty easy for me to go into a different space, a different faith, and just kind of go and enjoy that. I know many of my family and friends who've come with me to services of other faiths. It's more difficult. It's a challenge because you're not necessarily you're out of your comfort zone, and so you know it's going to be perhaps a little bit different, and who knows what kind of interactions you're going to have. Are they going to be welcoming? Are they going to be hostile? Are they going to be, you know, how are they going to be? And so my experience has been going to services of other faiths, and I've been to hundreds of services of other faiths, has been an incredibly helpful thing to get to see people face to face and talk with them, and maybe have a you know, some juice and donut afterwards and visit. But then those in the home conversations, if you can go out to lunch with someone or invite them into your home for lunch, or, you know, be invited into their home and get to sit down and have a serious conversation and get to know each other as people, and then continue that, you know, just have meaningful relationships with friends of other faiths, learn about each other, support and respect each other. And what I've learned is, in our culture that's becoming increasingly secular and increasingly kind of hostile to religion, you know, there's this group called the New Atheists that are, you know, that are making fun of religion and kind of down talking people of faith. Those of us of faith, whatever faith that is, if we can be friends, sure, it's great to have deep friendships within your own faith community. That's wonderful, faith community. But it's also great to have good relationships with people of other faiths who are also often misunderstood minority faiths within their communities, or they're trying to live a life of devotion and commitment to their faith in an increasingly secularized culture. And I've learned that being supportive of people of other faiths is powerful, and they're supportive of you. And so sort of the community of religious people, you know, the interfaith community can be a powerful support and resource for people in an increasingly secular, hostile society.
Amen to that. And of course, I was an atheist for like 12 years, so a lot of that resonates with me, as well as how my journey of being almost anti-religion for a while, and then kind of accepting maybe the utility good of religion as an agnostic, and then finally finding my way back to faith. But so I can empathize with a lot of wherever people are in their different journeys. Now, this is interesting because we talk about occupying an interfaith space, and literally, you are occupying an interfaith space right in the room that you're in. Maybe talk a little bit about some of the different objects that you have in your room. You mentioned you have some Eastern Orthodox stuff, some Jewish stuff. Maybe just talk about what the office you have is, a literal interfaith space.
Sure. I don't know if you can see it, but this is a Muslim prayer rug.
Okay.
My daughter brought back from Turkey. So these are our, let's see how it is. These are icons of Christ, Eastern Orthodox, or also called Orthodox Christian icons of Christ. Let's see, these three here are Buddhist statues. This one in the middle, this wooden one, was on my mom's shelf above the sink. And so I saw it every day growing up. It's a happy Buddha, and so you get good luck by rubbing the Buddha's big belly. And when she died, I asked for that, and so I have a token of my memory of my mom, which actually reminds me seeing all. And then down here are 3 Hindu statues, Shiva and Ganesha, and I'm forgetting about that one. And then I've got, let's see, Jewish Shabbat candles, Jewish shofar. I've got a number of Catholic rosaries, right?
Oh, that's great.
Here, and here. Yeah, this is a, let's see, this, that is a Buddhist blessing bowl, makes a lovely sound. But seeing all these actually reminds me of my sister Lana, who I mentioned was Catholic. My mom and her first husband had Lana, and then they got their marriage annulled. But the father insisted that my sister be raised Catholic, and so she was, and she went to Catholic school, and she ended up, like many people in the '60s, she ended up becoming a hippie and sort of leaving organized religion and sort of adopting a more spiritual but not religious approach. And I remember a conversation I had with her. I was in her apartment, and she had a bunch of statues of Buddhist and Hindu statues, and Mary and Jesus, and she had a crucifix. She had a bunch of religious objects. And I asked her about it, and she said, "Well, this is my shrine to all religions." I said, "Oh, tell me about that." She says, "Well, I don't know who's right. It could be the Catholics, could be the Muslims, could be the Hindus. So I figured, if I got something from all of them, when I die and get to the other side, I'll probably be okay. I'm like whoever's right." And I smiled and I said, that's an interesting approach. I said, I said, it's possible that the Mormons might be right. So would you like something from our faith too? She said, "Oh, do you guys have statues?" Well, we don't really do statues as much as our Catholic and Hindu and Buddhist friends. We do have this angel Moroni on the top of our temple, and we do have a Christian statue. She said, "Oh, could you get me one of the, like angel Moroni?" And I said, "I'll see." And this was before Deseret Book has all these statues and figurines and so on. And so it turns out we're at Walmart before Christmas. We go to the back of Walmart, and there's a whole wall full of.
I love it. And of course, if it's a Moroni angel at a Walmart, only in Utah or in the Mormon corridor would such a thing be possible, right, Monica?
Absolutely. Or like Mesa, Arizona, right?
Mesa, Arizona.
Exactly. So there was a little Angel Moroni statue. It cost us $20. It was made in China. And so I bought one for her and one for me. And I sent her, this gift. And she called me and said, "Oh, I'm so excited. I've added Moroni to my shrine of all faiths." And then about a year later, she called me. She says, "Dave, I got to tell you this story. And you'll appreciate this, Stephen." She said, "My ex-husband, he was evangelical. And so his mother, my sister's mother-in-law is evangelical. She came to spend time with her granddaughter. And so this evangelical Baptist from Texas comes in, and she sees my sister's shrine to all these Hindu and Buddhist statues and all, crucifixes and Mary, all that. And she's like, "What is that?" "Oh, that's my shrine to all faith." What is this Buddha? What these are idols. These are false idols. And my sister's former mother-in-law said, "I will not sleep in this house with these idols." So my sister had to box up all of her statues. Oh, sorry, I forgot to say. And then she says, "And what is this gold thing with this color? Like, what is that?" And my sister says, "Oh, that's the angel Moroni from the top of Mormon temples." And she says, "No way, they're the worst of all. They're a cult. They're all going to hell. I will not sleep in a house with all these cult idols." So my sister had to box them up, put them in the garage. And then she tells me, "But Dave, I want to tell you, after she left, I put my shrine back together, and just because of her attitude. I want you to know, I put the Angel Moroni front and center at the top. So the Angel Moroni now has the most prominence of all. So that was my sister's interfaith experience, and her, dealing with someone who, let's just say, wasn't so interested in having an interfaith experience.
Texas Baptist ex-mother-in-law. I knew exactly where that story was going.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, Monica, why don't we wrap? Why don't you got a final question or comment you want to make?
Oh, yeah, I've just been thinking about, stepping into these spaces that maybe we're not comfortable with. I think I'm more comfortable with it because I grew up with it. Those who grew up in a specific space of a religion, whether it's Latter-day Saint or Catholic or Muslim, I think we each can live in a bubble and miss out on so much goodness and so much connection that a lot of my friends that did grow up in Utah, they grew up with only Latter-day Saints. And they've said, I just don't know what to expect. I don't know what to do. And I said, you just step in. That's it. It could come out a little uncomfortable every once in a while. I've had those my experiences myself, but I would say 99% of the time, it's a beautiful thing. They're going to be welcoming. They're going to be loving. And again, if you're there to learn about them truly, not you're going in there as a skeptic or a judgmental person, then it is going to be a beautiful experience, and they'll be grateful for you to be there.
Yeah.
And I've got tons of experiences of that, but one is sticking out in my mind right now. While I was in a stake primary presidency, we joined up with San Andres Catholic Church in Payson, Utah. And they were doing a Thanksgiving food donation of Thanksgiving meals. So, they had the turkeys, the stuffing, the potatoes, the vegetables to give to families in need. And I took 2 of us from the presidency went, and 10 children from our stake to help. And we brought the potatoes and the stuffing to help donate to that. Because we're stepping into their space, we had to be willing to be more than just Latter-day Saints coming to serve. So I brought items for the kids to play games in between pickups so that they could really start to know each other, because a lot of the children there were from the Hispanic community. So I wanted them to kind of bond with them and understand them. And at first it is standoffish, right? Who are these people coming in? I don't know them at all. But by the end, because we integrated something where they could work together, by the end, they were teaching us some of these Latino dances, right? They had their music on their phones. And when we left, I felt like we had built a bond. So if you're going to take time to go, really be invested. Really tell yourself, I'm here to not just learn. I want you to be my friend, a real friend. I really want to learn about you. Hopefully sometime you'll understand me. I'm not here to preach today, but somewhere down the line, let's just all unite, because this was an awesome experience to serve our community together as 2 different religions. But I think that's the biggest thing to tell people. Step in with true intent of being Christ-like and loving others, and then it will all come together.
Fantastic. I call that the process of what we're doing is I refer to as interfaithing.
Yeah.
It's an action that we're doing the interfaithing today. What kind of interfaithing are you doing, folks? Have you reached out to people from other different churches and other religious groups? Have you spent time to occupy in their sacred space? Like I had the privilege to do when Monica gave me the tour of the Orem Temple. And I talked about the importance of this is a sacred space for your people. And that we need to be respectful of people's sacred spaces and their beliefs and the things that give them meaning in their life, okay? And I think we live in a world that's increasingly hostile to people of faith. And I think it's really important that, people who believe, it's a special thing. I lost belief for a long time, so I know how precious of a thing that is, faith. and in believing in something bigger than oneself. And also, we also have to recognize that, yes, we do acknowledge some of the terrible things that were done in God's name and religion's name. We own that. But we also have to recognize that there's also a certain beauty in faith and spirituality, and focus on the good. Look for the good in all that's out there, and frequent that and engage that. And if you do that, you will become a wholer person. And I would say you become a holier person. David, I want to thank you so much for coming on the program today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to visit with you. And again, thank you for your great work. The interfaith space is a challenging space for some people. And as you said, Monica, there may be some anxiety, there may be some awkwardness, there may be some discomfort. But to echo what you said, my experience is 99% of the time, it's been wholly positive. People are wholly welcoming, understanding. And if you don't quite know what you're doing, you're not quite sure how to follow the service, you're not quite sure what to do and what not to do, people are very kind and very patient. And I talk with my students a lot about, being willing to go and meet people on their sacred space. And we all know what it's like to have someone come into our chapel, our sacred space, and we can tell that they're not really comfortable. And we want to reach out, we want to help them, we want to be a person that is supportive of them. And that's how people are toward us when we go to other spaces as well. At least most of the time. Now and then, not so much.
So I want to share with everybody. So we have the website, AmericanFamiliesOfFaith.byu.edu. We also have their YouTube channel podcast. And of course, they're on all the different podcast formats. I am going to subscribe to your channel. So now I'm subscribed to American Families of Faith. And I also want to remind people to subscribe to the Utah Interfaith Forum. It's a little project. We're just getting off here, and we're very excited about it. And we're tied in with our Facebook group. I want to say, friends, say hi to all my homies in the Utah Interfaith Forum Facebook group. I love you. I love interacting with you. I love the interactions we're having here. And we want to bring that into the YouTube space as well. So make sure you are subscribed to the Utah Interfaith Forum. Make sure you are subscribed to the American Families of Faith. And make sure you check out the website of the American Families of Faith Project. Well, Monica, I thought this first interview went really good. What'd you think?
I think it was great. Thanks so much for coming on, David. I'm appreciative that you were willing to jump in and dive into this with us for our new adventure. So thank you.
Thanks. It's been delightful to be with you both. Thank you so much.
This was a wonderful conversation. Thank you, David. It's wonderful to be able to meet different people of different faith trajectories. So in the comments, folks, I want you to talk about some of the experiences you've had in the interfaith world. I also want you to comment on this conversation. And just what is, for a lot of people maybe who come, this might be a little out of their comfort zone. Maybe talk about why that maybe makes you feel uncomfortable, but also talk about maybe why you get benefit from these interfaith conversations. Because I really think that in this tumultuous times that we live in, where we get people that are not talking to each other, and we have these tribes and hostile groups to each other, I think if we can be peacemakers within the religious world, that we can also model the behavior, how we can do it also throughout the world as a whole. So I think it's really important what this project is all about. So make sure you do some interfaithing today. There are links in the description for everything that we talked about today. I want to thank everybody here. Mormon Book Reviews, of course. I love you guys, but don't forget, this is on both channels, but we're only going to do a few episodes on MBR. So you got to make sure if you want to catch the rest of the conversation, this continuing interfaith conversation, you need to subscribe to the Utah Interfaith Forum. It was a real blessing and privilege today to hear from y'all, folks. And I'm just going to say it because it's also on MBR. Remember, all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.